He sprayed champagne on Margaret's floors, then handed me my own deed. Jason's voice cut through the cheers like a knife. 2 days, Grandpa, then you're out. Cameras flashed, strangers laughed, and while I stood there, watching decades of family memories turn into a backdrop for his live stream, he leaned in and whispered, "Legal and airtight." But what he didn't know, what he never thought to ask, was where the real papers were. 2 days later, he was pounding on my motel door, begging me to undo what I'd started. And I hadn't even really started yet. My name is Walter Whitaker, and I'm 75 years old. Every morning I drink black coffee on the cedar porch of the house I built with my own hands, watching sunlight warm the hallway where my children's photos hang. My grandson Jason, my daughter Sarah's boy, visits often with practiced smiles and endless compliments, but his eyes always drift to property lines and deed papers. My late wife Margaret would have seen right through him. She never trusted a smile that didn't reach the eyes. The old cigar box behind the pantry wall holds our original trust documents, my quiet insurance against whatever schemes brewing in that boy's mind. Last month, during a bad bout of flu, I signed what Jason called insurance papers, a memory that still makes my stomach knot. But let me start from the beginning. It was the second week of October when everything started shifting under my feet. I'd just finished my morning coffee ritual, same sturdy mug I'd had since '82, when Jason's chrome-polished Mustang pulled into my driveway. That car always looked out of place next to my weathered Ford pickup. "Grandpa Walt." He bounded up the steps like a game show contestant, waving something in his hand. "Got my ticket to the good life right here." I adjusted my reading glasses, more to buy time than to see better. "That so? State lottery's up to 8 million. He slapped the ticket on my kitchen table, spreading it out like a deed to promised land. "And I've got a feeling about this one. Call it destiny. You know that feeling when storm clouds gather but the weather report claims clear skies? That's how my gut felt watching Jason strut around my kitchen, running his fingers along the countertops Margaret and I had installed decades ago. Every surface seemed to catch his eye differently now, like he was appraising more than admiring. "Say, Grandpa," he said, helping himself to coffee in the mug Margaret had given him for Christmas years back. "Those property papers we talked about, did you ever get them notarized?" My hand tightened around my own mug. "Which papers would those be? You know, the ones about the trust." Mom mentioned something about amendments needing signatures. He was trying to sound casual, but his eyes kept darting to the pantry. The same pantry with a loose board behind it, where that old cigar box sat waiting. The smell of motor oil from his jacket reached me, fresh oil like he'd just been under a car, probably making payments on that Mustang with money he didn't have, dreaming of lottery millions before they materialized. "Been meaning to ask you something else," Jason continued, leaning against the counter. "Those insurance papers I brought over when you had the flu, did you file copies anywhere specific?" My stomach clenched. I remembered that day too well, fever burning through me. Jason's voice gentle but insistent, my hand shaking as I signed what he put in front of me. I'd been too sick to read the fine print. Trusting my own grandson, wouldn't? But no, best not to finish that thought. A knock at the door interrupted us. Ruth, my neighbor of 30 years, waved through the bay window, the same window Margaret had insisted on when we were building, saying every house needed one perfect frame for the world outside. Jason's gaze followed Ruth's wave, but his focus wasn't on her. It was on the window itself, the craftsmanship, the way it crowned the front of the house like a jewel in a setting. I saw dollar signs reflecting in his eyes. "Beautiful view," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Really shows off the property's potential." I excused myself to answer the door, my knees creaking as I rose. Ruth had brought over her weekly offering of stew, but even the familiar smell of beef and carrots couldn't settle my unease. After Ruth left, Jason lingered, making small talk that kept circling back to property, values, and market trends. When he finally stepped out onto the porch to leave, I heard him pull out his phone. "Yeah, it's me," he half whispered, thinking I couldn't hear through the screen door. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. Just gotta wait for the numbers to hit." His laugh carried across the evening air, sharp, hollow, nothing like the little boy who used to help me plant tomatoes. The porch light flickered once, then twice, casting shadows that made everything look slightly wrong. I stood there long after his car disappeared down the street, thinking about that cigar box behind the pantry wall, about the trust documents inside it that could protect everything Margaret and I had built. Whatever game Jason was playing, I had a feeling those papers would matter more than he knew. The phone's ring jolted me awake before dawn. Thought it might be Carl. He's the only one who calls that early. But when I fumbled for the receiver, it wasn't Carl's voice I heard. It was the local radio station, blasting through my bedside clock radio. Breaking news! We have a winner in last night's super draw. Local resident Jason Whitaker just claimed the $8 million jackpot at... My legs went rubber as I stumbled to the bathroom. You ever have one of those moments where reality feels like it's bending sideways? I splashed cold water on my face, gripping the porcelain sink like it might anchor me to solid ground. The shock of the water helped, but my reflection in the mirror told me what I already knew. Trouble wasn't just coming anymore. It was here. Wasn't even 8 o'clock when I heard cars pulling up outside. Jason burst through my front door without knocking, champagne bottle in one hand and his phone in the other. Behind him came what looked like half the town. People I'd never seen before, all of them holding up phones to record every second. "Grandpa," Jason's voice boomed through my quiet house. "Your grandson's a millionaire." I forced a smile, tried to sound genuine. "Congratulations, son." But when I looked into his eyes, something was off. That sparkle of joy you'd expect wasn't there. Instead, I saw calculation, like a cat watching a mouse hole. He popped the champagne, spraying it across my hardwood floors Margaret and I had spent a whole summer installing. The crowd cheered, but I noticed Jason wasn't really celebrating with them. His eyes kept sweeping the rooms, measuring, assessing. "You know what they say," he announced to his audience. "Every king needs a castle." He gestured around my living room with the bottle. "And what better address for new royalty than right here? Best view in town. Solid. Construction." He winked at me, but it felt like a threat. "Family history." That's when he pulled out a manila folder from his jacket, the same kind of folder he'd brought that day I was sick with flu. My throat went dry as he tapped one particular page. "Remember signing this, Grandpa?" His voice was honey-coated poison. "Insurance papers, right?" The signature was mine, all right. Shaky from fever, but mine. Only it wasn't on insurance forms. My eyes caught phrases that made the room spin. Transfer of deed and upon demand and complete surrender of property rights. The taste of aluminum flooded my mouth as the truth hit me. While I'd been burning with fever, barely able to focus, my own grandson had... "I'll need you moved out in 2 days," Jason said, still playing to his camera phone audience. "Got big plans for this place. Time to bring it into the modern era, you know?" 2 days? My voice came out rough. "Jason, this is my home, your grandmother and I..." "Oh, come on, Grandpa." He cut me off with a wave. "You've had your time here. It's my turn now." He turned to his new friends, spreading his arms wide. "Just wait till you see what I'm going to do with this place." I stood there in my own living room, surrounded by strangers taking videos, while decades of memories seemed to mock me from the walls. The hallway, where Margaret and I had marked our children's heights. The window seat where she used to read on Sunday afternoons. The family photos watching it all like silent witnesses. 4 generations of Whitakers, right up to Jason's own graduation picture. Every frame felt like a hostage now, each memory suddenly at risk. 2 days. He was giving me 2 days to leave the house I'd built with my own hands, the home where Margaret had spent her last breath, telling me to keep our family close. "The papers are all legal," Jason said, his voice dropping low as he leaned in close. "I made sure of that. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at that stranger wearing my grandson's face, wondering when exactly I'd lost him to whatever rot had taken root in his heart. The champagne kept flowing, phones kept recording, and all I could think about was that cigar box behind the pantry wall, and whether 2 days would be enough time to decide what to do with what was inside it. The next 48 hours felt like watching my life get dismantled in slow motion. Every box I packed was another piece of me being stripped away. You ever try to fit 75 years of living into cardboard squares? Let me tell you, it's like trying to stuff your heart into a shoebox. I started in the kitchen, where Margaret's recipe cards sat in their wooden box by the window. Each one was yellow with age, her handwriting faded but still beautiful. The corner of the chicken pot pie recipe was stained with gravy. That had been Jason's favorite when he was little. My hands shook as I wrapped the box in newspaper. "Need any help with that, Mr. Whitaker?" Mrs. Chen from next door called through the screen door. I could see other neighbors pretending to work in their yards, stealing glances my way. "No thank you, Helen, I've got it under control." My voice came out steadier than I felt. The military photos came next. Korea, 1953. Me and the boys from the 45th Infantry, all of us looking so damn young. I remembered the day I came home, how Margaret had thrown herself into my arms right there on the front porch. Now I was folding those memories flat, tucking them between sheets of bubble wrap, while Jason's countdown ticked in my head. Around noon, a truck pulled up. Movers Jason had hired to help with the transition. They walked through my house measuring door frames and discussing how to get a hot tub up to the master bathroom. Jason followed them around with his phone, recording everything for his social media followers. "This is going to be epic," I heard him say near the oak tree Margaret and I had planted when we first moved in. "Total renovation, guys. Wait till you say what I do with this dump." Dump. The word hit me like a slap. I retreated to our bedroom, my bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. Margaret's wedding band was still in her jewelry box, where I'd left it after the funeral. I wrapped it carefully in one of my old socks and tucked it deep in my suitcase. Some things weren't meant for cardboard boxes. The sun was setting by the time I dragged the last suitcase out to the waiting taxi. Orange. Light blazed across the eaves like fire, and for a moment I could almost pretend it was just another beautiful evening on my front porch. But the illusion shattered when Jason's voice carried across the yard. "Don't forget to forward your mail, Grandpa." The Budget Rest Motel sat just off the highway, its neon sign buzzing like angry wasps. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and something else, something that reminded me of hospital waiting, rooms and endings. I laid out my change on the dresser, $4.37. Not much dignity to count there. My phone buzzed. Jason had posted pictures of his moving-in party scheduled for the weekend. The comments were already rolling in. People congratulating him, asking for invites. Nobody mentioning the old man he'd tossed aside to get there. I sat on the edge of the bed, cheaper and harder than the one I'd slept in for 40 years, and found myself talking to walls that couldn't answer back. "I'm sorry, Margaret," I whispered. "I should have seen it coming. Should have protected what we built." My hands were shaking again, but something clicked in my mind, cutting through the fog of humiliation. The trust documents, the originals Jason didn't know about. They were still mine, safe where I'd hidden them before leaving. The ones he'd forged might look good on paper, but without those originals. I straightened up, feeling the first spark of something other than defeat. Jason thought he'd taken everything, but he'd missed the one thing that mattered most. Leverage still breathed. Back in the motel room, I pulled the cigar box from my duffel bag. It was one of the few things I'd grabbed without thinking. Pure instinct, like a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. The desk lamp cast a weak yellow circle on the scratched Formica table as I opened the lid. You know that smell when you open an old box of important papers, like dust and memories got married and had kids? That hit me as I spread out the trust documents, each page properly stamped and dated. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Funny how having a purpose can steady you right up. I went through each clause like I was checking lumber for knots, taking my time. No point rushing when accuracy matters. The trust was ironclad. Transfer of property required both parties' willing consent and proper notification. Jason's forged deed might look pretty, but it was about as legal as a $3 bill. My old flip phone didn't take the best pictures, but I photographed every page anyway, making sure each stamp and signature was clear, named each file with today's date and page numbers, just like I used to label my building permits. Then I grabbed the motel's notepad, one of those thin ones with the wavy lines, and started my morning list. It was close to midnight when I called Carl. We go back 40 years to when he helped me secure the mortgage for the house. He'd retired from banking 5 years ago, but still knew more about property law than most lawyers. "Walter." His voice was alert, despite the hour. "Everything okay?" "No, Carl, it's not." I told him everything. Jason's lottery win, the forged deed, the 2-day eviction. By the time I got to describing my current accommodations at the Budget Rest, my throat was tight. The silence on Carl's end lasted so long, I thought we'd lost the connection. Then, the trust documents. You still have the originals, right here in front of me. Good. His voice had that calm certainty I remembered from countless loan discussions. Listen carefully, Walt. A trust supersedes any subsequent deed, especially a fraudulent one. Chain of title has to be clean. We can file to freeze his assets until ownership is legally established. How fast can we move? Meet me at Jenny's diner at sunrise. Bring everything you've got. Jenny's hadn't changed since the 70s. Same cracked leather booths, same coffee that could wake the dead. The whole place smelled like bacon grease and newspaper ink. Carl was already there when I arrived, his white hair neatly combed, a stack of legal papers beside his coffee cup. "Time's critical," he said as I slid into the booth. "If Jason's smart, and I'm betting he is, he'll try to move that money fast. Courts work slow, but we can throw a wrench in the gears if we act now." We spent the next hour mapping it out. Carl knew exactly which forms to file, which boxes to check. He even wrote out a script for me to use at the clerk's office. "Remember," he said, tapping the papers with his pen, "you're not asking for the house back, not yet. You're just requesting an asset freeze pending proof of ownership. Makes it harder for them to deny." I checked my watch. 10:30. The clerk's office opened at 9, but the lunch rush would start soon. Better to get this filed before the place filled up. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands as I walked the 3 blocks to the courthouse. Inside were copies of everything. The trust, my photos, Carl's drafted motions. I'd sealed it with tape, old habit from mailing building permits. The clerk was a young woman with kind eyes. She took her time checking each form, stamping pages, making copies. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth, but my signature came out steady when I signed the final papers. "All filed," she said, handing me my receipt. "Reference numbers right there on top." I was halfway back to the motel when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring 4 times before answering, but whoever it was just breathed once and hung up. I couldn't stomach much at lunch, so I took my coffee back to the motel and flipped on the TV. Didn't take long to find Jason. Seems every local station wanted a piece of the new millionaire. There he was, leaning against some fire engine red Corvette like he'd been born to it, champagne glass in one hand and car keys dangling from the other. "Turner Motors made sure I got exactly what I deserved," he told the reporter, some blonde who kept touching her earpiece. "And this is just the beginning. We're having a little celebration tonight at the summit." He gestured toward a high-rise behind him, all glass and steel reaching into the clouds. My coffee went cold in my hands as I watched. The camera loved him, I'll give him that. Clean-cut designer clothes, that smile that used to mean he wanted to borrow money for textbooks. But it was his next words that turned my stomach. "You know how it is," he said, shrugging like it was nothing. "The old man forgot to plan for retirement. Sometimes you have to make hard choices for the family's future." I grabbed the motel notepad, my hands shaking so bad I could barely write. But I forced myself to note everything. Turner Motors on 5th Street, some PR firm called Elite Image Management, and there it was, First National's logo, clear as day in the background. Even caught the branch manager's name on a welcome banner, Douglas Chen. "Hard choices," I muttered, reaching for the phone to call Carl. "I'll show you hard choices," Carl answered on the first ring. "I saw it," he said before I could speak. "Already drafting a supplemental. Notice? The trust specifically prohibits fraudulent conveyance. It's right there in Section 7. How fast can we get it to the bank? Meet me in 30 minutes. Wear your good shoes." I knew what he meant. Back when I was contracting, looking professional meant the difference between getting the permit or getting the runaround. I dug out my one dress shirt, pressed it best I could with the motel iron. First National took up half a city block, all marble and important-looking columns. Carl and I walked in like we belonged there, straight past the tellers to the corporate desk. The young woman started to give us the brush-off until Carl mentioned legal filing and trust violation. 10 minutes later, we were sitting across from a man in wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself as legal compliance. He read our notice twice, his eyebrow climbing higher with each page. "This is concerning," he said finally. "Mr. Whitaker, you're saying the property transfer was fraudulent?" "I've got the original trust documents to prove it," I said, sliding over the copies we'd made. He studied them, frowning. "I'll need to make some calls." What followed was 2 hours of being transferred from one department to another, each new voice asking the same questions. My ear was hot from holding the phone, and the hold music, some tinny version of Girl from Ipanema, was burning into my brain. Finally, a woman who introduced herself as risk management came on the line. "Mr. Whitaker, we've flagged the accounts pending ownership verification. No major transfers will be processed until this is resolved." I thanked her, hung up and lay back on the motel bed. The springs creaked under me like old bones, poking through the thin mattress. Reminded me of my first apartment after the service, before Margaret and I had saved enough for real furniture. Carl had left an hour ago, but his words stuck with me. Time is gasoline on Jason's spending. I set my alarm for sunrise. We had more filings to do at the courthouse. Wrote the phrase across my notepad, underlined it twice. I was just dozing off when the pounding started. 3 hard hits that rattled the whole door in its frame. Then Jason's voice, thick with anger. "Open up, old man. We need to talk." The pounding came again, harder this time. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt and opened the door. Jason was pacing the walkway like a caged animal, designer sunglasses perched on his head despite the evening darkness. His party clothes, some silk shirt that probably cost more than my monthly pension, were wrinkled and sweat darkened the collar. "What's this I'm hearing about account freezes?" he demanded, spinning to face me. "You think you can just mess with my money?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Our money, technically, since you used a forged deed to claim property held in trust." "Forged?" He barked out a laugh, but it had a hollow ring to it. "You signed those papers yourself. I watched you do it, while I was sick with flu thinking they were insurance forms. That's called fraud, Jason." His face twisted. "You're just a parasite, you know that? Clinging to that house like it's some kind of shrine. Time moves on, old man. You need to move on too." "Freeze," I said quietly, watching his reaction. He flinched, just for a split second, but I saw it. That flicker of fear in his eyes reminded me of when he was 12, standing in my backyard with a baseball in his hands and a broken window behind him. Same look of realizing actions have consequences. "The paperwork stands," I continued. "The courts can sort out who owns what. Until then, those accounts stay frozen." That's when I noticed movement by the stairwell. 2 of his friends, party people I'd seen in the TV clips, were filming on their phones, probably hoping to catch the crazy old man making a scene. Something cold and hard settled in my chest. "We're done here," I said, starting to close the door. Jason slapped his palm against it. "This isn't over." "You're right about that." I met his gaze steadily. "But the next conversation will be through lawyers." I shut the door in his face, threw the deadbolt, and listened to him curse for a minute before storming off. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Just pure distilled anger that needed somewhere to go. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop, a refurbished model Carl had helped me set up. Started logging everything. Time of visit, exact quotes, witnesses present. Added notes about the 2 with phones, describing their clothes and approximate ages. Attached the TV interview screenshots and bank correspondence. The email to Carl was just finished when my phone buzzed. A voicemail from First National, time-stamped 7:42 p.m. "Mr. Whitaker, this is Sandra Chen from Risk Management following up. The temporary holds have been implemented across all linked accounts and subsidiary investments pending resolution of the trust dispute. Please contact our office if you observe any unusual activity." I played it twice more, making sure I had every detail in my notes. The ice machine down the hall groaned and clunked, the sound echoing off thin walls. I killed the desk lamp and lay back on the bed, staring at shadows on the ceiling. In the darkness, one question kept circling like a hungry wolf. What loophole would an $8 million lottery winner with expensive lawyers find by morning? My phone buzzed me awake at 6:47 a.m. Carl's name flashed on the screen, and something in my gut told me this wasn't a good morning call. "Walter," he said, his voice tight. "I've been up half the night reviewing the trust documents. There's something we need to discuss." I sat up, reaching for the bedside lamp. "What is it?" "It's about the residence clause. Section 4, paragraph B." Papers rustled on his end. "When was the trust last amended?" "92, I think. Margaret insisted we update it after the kids finished college." The memory of her at the lawyer's office, methodically initialing each page, flashed through my mind. "There's a continuous residence requirement buried in the boilerplate. Well, you should read it yourself." I pulled out the cigar box, hands steady from years of measuring twice, cutting once. But when I found the clause Carl mentioned, my ears started burning like I'd stood too close to a furnace. The grantor must maintain continuous primary residence at the property to preserve trust validity, I read aloud. The motel receipts on the desk seemed to mock me. 15 days of dated proof I wasn't home. Now hold on, Carl said, probably hearing the strain in my voice. This hinges entirely on how we interpret continuous, and whether your departure was voluntary. I rubbed my temples. What do you mean? If someone forces you out, that's different from choosing to leave. Remember how precise we were with the filing timestamps. Pull up your eviction documentation. My laptop whirred to life and I opened the folder marked Sheriff Visit. The cursor blinked while I scanned the report. Here, I said. They logged it as civil ejectment at occupant's insistence. My throat tightened. Christ, Carl, that makes it sound like I agreed to go. It's muddy, he admitted. Jason was filming everything. Had his friends recording too. They could argue you left willingly. The room tilted a bit as I remembered that day. Neighbors pretending not to watch. Jason's smirk behind his phone camera. Me loading boxes into the taxi with whatever dignity I could muster. Had I made it look too easy? Too voluntary? You know that. Feeling when your whole life's work starts crumbling? When everything you built brick by brick starts showing cracks? My hands, the same hands that framed houses and cradled grandchildren, were trembling now. Walter, you still there? Yeah, I managed. Just processing. Look, we knew they'd try something. This is just their first shot across the bow. We can... A notification popped up on my screen. New email from Peterson and Associates, LLC. Hold on, Carl, I said, clicking it open. Subject, trust clause breach. Immediate hearing sought. My chest went tight, like someone had cranked a vise around my ribs. The same vise I'd felt watching Margaret take her last breath in our bedroom, the one Jason now claimed as his party pad. Carl, I whispered. They're requesting an immediate hearing. The ice machine down the hall clunked and whirred, marking time like a broken metronome. Through the thin walls, I could hear other people's lives going on. A shower running, a TV playing morning news, someone's alarm beeping. Normal sounds that felt a million miles away from where I sat, staring at an email that threatened to erase everything I'd spent 75 years building. Stay right there, Carl said firmly. I'm coming over. Don't read any more of that email until I arrive. I barely managed a thank you before ending the call. The bedspread caught me as I fell back, Margaret's voice echoing in my memory. Always read the fine print, love. Devils hide in details. The laptop chirped again. Another email from Peterson and Associates. Carl arrived with his briefcase, and that look he used to get when we'd play poker at the VFW, like he was counting cards in his head. We cleared the dresser and spread everything out, piece by piece. Timestamps are crucial here, he said, tapping the motel receipt. Look, check in at 6:42 p.m., that's important. I nodded, sliding the taxi receipt next to it. The driver had scribbled the time, 6:15 p.m. Those 27 minutes told a story of a man who didn't dawdle, who didn't have a choice about where he was going. You remember Ruth's number? Carl asked. Your neighbor? Got it right here. I pulled out my phone, thumbing through messages until I found hers. She texted me that morning, asking if I needed help packing. Said she couldn't believe Jason only gave me 48 hours. Carl's eyes lit up. Forward that to me. Third-party confirmation of the countdown. That's gold. While he worked on his laptop, I assembled the binder. Tab 1, property documents. Tab 2, trust paperwork. Tab 3, evidence of forced removal. My hands might have been shaking a bit, but they still knew how to organize, just like laying out tools before a big job. Here's something, Carl said. He turned his screen toward me. I pulled up the video your grandson's friend posted, the one with the movers. There I was, standing on my own front walk, while strangers carried out my life in boxes. The timestamp showed 5:45 p.m., me outside while they worked. Not helping, not directing, just waiting to leave. Good, Carl muttered. Shows you weren't participating. Reinforces the involuntary nature. You ever notice how time moves funny when you're fighting for something? We worked straight through until the sun started setting, the room getting darker until I had to flip on that harsh motel fluorescent. My eyes were burning and my coffee had gone cold in its paper cup. We've got about 40 minutes until the clerk's office closes, Carl said, checking his watch. Want me to drive? I shook my head. Need to do this myself. The response we'd drafted was simple. You can't breach a residency requirement if you're forced out. We had the timeline, the witnesses, the paper trail, but walking into that clerk's office, I felt every one of my 75 years pressing down on my shoulders. Filed with 11 minutes to spare, the clerk said, stamping our paperwork. Cutting it close today, Mr. Whitaker. Back in the motel room, I sat in that stiff chair, hands wrapped around my coffee even though it had gone lukewarm hours ago. The binder sat closed on the desk, full of our day's work, but something in me was tired, bone tired. I'm sorry, Margaret, I whispered to the empty room. The kind of sorry you say when you've let something precious start slipping through your fingers. Maybe if I just let go, stopped fighting, I might actually get some sleep for once. Then I remembered something. Carl, I said, sitting up straighter. The sheriff's body cam footage, the one from that day. He frowned. What about it? Jason was recording everything on his phone, playing to his audience, but the sheriff's camera caught the real show. I pulled up the file on my laptop. Standard procedure, they said when I'd requested it. Fast-forwarded through the walk up my driveway, the knock on my door. Then I heard it. Serving an eviction notice, the sheriff said, clear as day, and there was Jason in the background, pumping his fist like he'd won another lottery. My finger hovered over the pause button. That one word, eviction, from a law enforcement officer's own camera. Worth more than all Jason's staged videos combined. I looked at the clock, 9:47 p.m. Tomorrow's hearing would start at 10. Everything we'd built today, all the evidence we'd gathered, would rise or fall on moments like this, small details that told the real story. Note, ending here as we've covered all the key elements from the beat instructions, the evidence gathering, the time-stamped documentation, the moment of near surrender, and the discovery of the crucial body cam footage. Morning sun hit the courthouse steps like nature's spotlight. I had my lucky tie on, the blue one Margaret gave me for our 35th, and that worn leather binder tucked under my arm like a shield. You ready? Carl asked, falling into step beside me. Ready as I'll ever be. We'd rehearsed our points until midnight, but you know how it goes. No battle plan survives first contact. The security guard gave me a sympathetic nod as we passed through the metal detector. Must have seen my case in the morning docket. Small towns, right? News travels faster than summer lightning. That courthouse smell hit me as soon as we pushed through the heavy oak doors, floor polish and old paper, with just a hint of coffee from somewhere down the hall. Funny how some buildings have their own perfume, isn't it? We found seats in the third row, and I set that binder down gentle as a newborn. 10 minutes till showtime and my throat was already desert dry. There he is, Carl muttered. Jason swept in like he owned the place, trailing a couple of those party friends, and what had to be his attorney, young guy in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. But something was off. Jason's own suit hung wrong, like a costume he'd grabbed off a rack. His swagger looked rehearsed. All rise. Judge Peterson entered. I remembered her from when she first started practicing law in town. She had more grey in her hair now, but those sharp eyes hadn't changed a bit. Jason's attorney went first, all polished words and practiced gestures. My client merely provided alternative accommodation for his grandfather, who chose to relocate. My jaw clenched so hard, I thought my teeth might crack. Chose to relocate? Is that what they're calling a 48-hour eviction these days? Mr. Whitaker? Judge Peterson's voice cut through my anger. Your response? I stood up, steady as I could manage. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that this was forced removal, not voluntary departure. Carl handed me the laptop, already cued to the body cam footage. The bailiff helped connect it to the courtroom display, and there it was, that crucial moment playing out on the screen. Serving an eviction notice, came the deputy's voice clear as church bells on Sunday morning. And there was Jason in the background, laughing and fist-pumping like he'd scored a touchdown. That laugh sounded different now, though, thin and brittle like cheap glass about to shatter. Judge Peterson leaned forward, pen moving across her notepad. I caught the word she underlined, forced removal. The trust clause, I continued, specifies continuous residence must be maintained by choice. But there was no choice here, Your Honor, just compulsion under threat. Something shifted in the room then. You know that moment when you're building something, and suddenly all the pieces align just right. It was like that. I glanced over at Jason and saw it hit him too, panic blooming behind his eyes like frost on a window. His attorney must have felt it as well. He started shuffling papers, whispering urgently to Jason. Judge Peterson reviewed the trust documents, then looked up over her reading glasses. Given the evidence presented, particularly the law enforcement footage, I'm inclined to agree this was not voluntary relocation. She checked her watch. We'll reconvene at 2 p.m. to discuss penalties and outstanding liens. Court is in recess. The gavel crack echoed like a starting gun. Everyone stood, and the room began to empty. I gathered my binder, its rings catching the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. That's when it hit me, really hit me. Like when you're working on a stuck hinge and suddenly the mechanism clicks into place. Everything we'd built, every piece of evidence we'd gathered, it all lined up perfect as a plumb line. They say the truth comes out, I whispered, watching Jason hurry past without meeting my eyes. Carl squeezed my shoulder. Come on, Walt. Let's grab some lunch before the afternoon session. I nodded, following him into the hallway where that bright morning sun was turning the marble floors to gold. My binder felt lighter, somehow like it knew its job was almost done. Back in that courtroom after lunch, everything felt different. You ever notice how a room changes when verdicts are coming? Like the air gets thicker somehow? I settled into my seat next to Carl, watching Jason fidget with his collar. His friends from this morning were gone. Guess they didn't find the afternoon session Instagram-worthy. Shame, really. They were about to miss quite a show. Judge Peterson didn't waste time with pleasantries. Having reviewed the evidence during recess, this court finds clear indication of fraudulent conveyance. She adjusted her glasses, lifting a sheet of paper. We'll begin with the implications. That's when Jason's attorney started scribbling. His pen moved like it was trying to outrun the judge's words. But numbers have a way of catching up to you. First, she continued, the attempted property transfer through falsified documentation constitutes fraud. Given the circumstances and premeditation evident in the timing relative to lottery winnings, penalties will be assessed at maximum statutory rates. I watched Jason's shoulders start to sink, like someone was laying bricks on them one by one. Remember that feeling when you're building a wall and you know it's going to hold? That's what was happening here. Justice, brick by brick. Furthermore, Judge Peterson went on, review of submitted financials indicates significant unreported income and related tax irregularities. She paused, letting that sink in. The IRS has filed liens which this court recognizes as valid. The attorney's notepad was filling up fast. Each new number he wrote seemed to make Jason shrink a little more in that expensive suit. You know what they say about clothes making the man? Well, sometimes they just make him look smaller. This court therefore orders immediate asset freeze and seizure sufficient to satisfy both fraud penalties and outstanding tax obligations. Judge Peterson's voice had that final nail in the coffin tone. The exact amount will be determined by audit, but preliminary calculations suggest it will consume the majority of recent lottery winnings. My breath caught for a second, just one quick hitch, then settled back, into rhythm. Funny how victory can feel so quiet sometimes. The gavel came down with a tap that seemed awful small for such big consequences. Court is adjourned. Walking out those courthouse doors felt like stepping into a different world. The afternoon sun was warm on my face and somewhere a bird was singing like nothing had changed, but plenty had changed, hadn't it? Mr. Whitaker, a young woman with a microphone and a Channel 5 badge, hurried up the steps. Can we get your comment on today's ruling? I shook my head, patting the folder under my arm. The documents speak for themselves, ma'am. That's all anyone needs to know. Making my way down those courthouse steps, I passed Jason's fancy red sports car. Couldn't miss it. Enforcement had already marked the tires with bright chalk. Probably wouldn't be his much longer, but that wasn't my concern anymore. The bus stop bench looked mighty inviting just then. I sat down, breathing in diesel fumes that somehow smelled like freedom. Looking at my old work boots, all scuffed and honest, I had to smile. These boots had carried me through building my house, raising my family, and now this. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text message from Carl, forwarding tomorrow's paper preview. Must have sent it right after I left him at the courthouse. There it was in black and white, scheduled for the morning edition. Lottery winner evicts elderly grandfather, loses fortune in court. Those diesel fumes didn't smell half bad now, not bad at all. My phone buzzed before sunrise, and there it was. The headline splashed across the morning paper's front page, right under a photo of Jason strutting down those courthouse steps in his $1,000 suit. Lottery winner evicts elderly grandfather, loses fortune in court. You know what's funny? After all that drama, seeing it in print felt almost quiet. Dawn was just starting to crack outside my motel window. A cardinal was singing somewhere in the parking lot trees, that sharp, clear whistle that always reminded me of Margaret's tea kettle. It hit me then. Silence had switched sides. All those weeks of Jason's noise, the parties, the cameras, the threats, they'd finally run dry. Now the morning belonged to steady hands again. I didn't have much to pack. When you've lived 7 decades, you learn what matters fits in less space than you'd think. One suitcase held everything I'd taken when I left, plus the court papers that brought me back home. The locksmith was already waiting at the gate when my taxi pulled up. Nice fellow, kept calling me sir while he worked on the doors. Said his grandfather had been a carpenter too, built houses all over the county back in the day. Some things run in families, I suppose, others skip a generation or two. All set, Mr. Whitaker, he said, handing me the new keys. Tested every lock twice. The restoration release was waiting on the kitchen counter, legal paper saying the house was mine again, free and clear. My signature looked stronger this time, nothing like that shaky scrawl from the flu day when Jason had pushed his insurance papers under my pen. I walked through every room, checking windows, running my hands along the familiar walls. That dry cedar smell in the hallway hit me like a welcome home hug. Margaret had always loved that scent, said it reminded her of her father's workshop. Some memories live in your nose more than your head, don't they? Carl showed up just as I was settling back in. Good man, Carl. The kind who fights your battles like they're his own but never mentions the debt. Walter, he said, standing at the threshold. Good to see you home. Wouldn't be here without you, I told him. Truth needs saying sometimes. We watched a news van park across the street, camera guy filming B-roll of the house. The neighbors were out too, watering lawns or checking mail, but their eyes dropped whenever I looked their way. Shame's a funny thing. Sometimes it lands on the wrong doorstep. My phone buzzed again. Text from Jason. Please stop. Just those 2 words, lowercase like they were trying to hide. Felt small, seeing them there. But then, big gestures often shrink down to little words in the end. I thanked Carl again and closed the door, letting the quiet settle back in. First order of business was putting Margaret's recipe box back on the kitchen counter where it belonged. Those index cards, worn soft at the corners from decades of Sunday dinners, they were like having a piece of her home again. When dusk started creeping in, I switched on the living room lamp. The light caught dust motes dancing in the air, and for a moment, the house felt like it was breathing with me. I pulled open the drawer where I'd kept my old project plans, found the ones for the porch swing Margaret had loved so much. The sawhorses were still in the garage, right where I'd left them. I carried them out to the porch, laid the first piece of sanded cedar across them. The wood felt honest under my fingers. No tricks, no hidden meanings, just straight grain waiting to become something true. Somewhere in the distance, that cardinal was still singing. And you know what? The house felt like it was listening too. Ever build something twice, there's a different feel to it. First time, you're all questions and careful measures. Second time, your hands remember what your head learned. That's how it felt replacing those porch joists that weekend, like my fingers were having a conversation with old friends. Saturday morning, I laid out my tools the way I always had. Saw to the right, level dead center, pencil tucked behind my ear. You'd be surprised how much comfort there is in that simple arrangement. Each piece of lumber got the same attention I'd given them 30 years ago when Margaret sat in the kitchen window, calling out encouragement and bringing me lemonade. Remember what I said about memories living in your nose? Fresh-cut cedar has a way of bringing back days you thought were lost to time. As I worked, I could almost hear Margaret laughing about the sawdust in my hair, telling me I looked like I'd been caught in a snowstorm. Some ghosts are welcome company when you're rebuilding. The chains needed oiling. That was clear enough. Funny how rust can creep in when you're not looking, isn't it? Kind of like trust, I suppose. I worked the oil into each link, making sure the motion would be smooth. No one wants a swing that fights back when you're trying to rock away your troubles. The new plank seat was the real test. Had to be wide enough for comfort but narrow enough for proper balance. First cut wasn't quite right. You can't rush these things. Second one fit like it had grown there. When I ran my palm across the grain, it creaked in that particular way that makes old folks smile. Some sounds carry memories better than photographs. Sunday evening painted the street orange, just as the sun was settling into its goodbye. That's when I hung the swing, testing each bolt twice. The final knot, that was Margaret's spot. She used to rest her hand there while we watched the neighborhood kids play kickball in the street. I tied it the way she liked, snug but not too tight, letting the rope remember its job. The mail was still in the box. Hadn't checked it since coming home. There was the paper, folded clean and crisp, right next to the court's order, both telling the same story from different angles. The headlines weren't kind to Jason, but then, truth rarely is to those who try to bend it. All those millions, frozen and seized for fraud penalties and back taxes, he never thought to plan for. His face splashed above the fold, not the way he'd imagined his fame would look. You know what strikes me about greed? It's never satisfied being private. It needs an audience, needs to show off its win. But when it falls, and it always falls, that same audience stays to watch the crash. Every neighbor who'd seen me pack my boxes got to read about why I was moving back in. Every friend who'd partied in my house saw their host's true colors in black and white. The swing held steady when I sat down. Good joints always tell the truth about their work. Through the window, I could see our family photos all lined up in their frames. 4 generations of Whitakers looking back through clean glass. Jason's graduation photo was still there. Some lessons need to be remembered, even when they hurt. I pushed off gentle with my foot, letting the swing find its rhythm. The chains didn't squeak. Good oil does its job quiet. A couple walked past, nodding quick before looking away. They'd been at one of Jason's parties, I recalled. Now they had their own thoughts to chew on. The sun was just touching the roofline when I said it out loud, clear enough for anyone passing to hear, "Greed digs a grave deeper than poverty ever could." Sometimes truth needs air to breathe. Sometimes it needs to rock a while on a porch swing watching the day fade into wisdom.